Somewhere in a classified storage facility, there is a car you were never supposed to know about. It was built by engineers who believed they had changed everything. It was tested once, maybe twice, behind closed doors, on private tracks, with armed security at every gate. And then it was destroyed. Not recalled, not shelved, not quietly discontinued. Destroyed, crushed, incinerated, erased from the official record as though it had never existed at all. Why would a car manufacturer spend millions of dollars building a vehicle and then destroy it before anyone could drive it? The answers are more disturbing than you might think. Some of these cars were too fast. Some were too efficient. Some threatened the wrong industries, offended the wrong governments, or revealed technologies that powerful people wanted kept quiet. And some were destroyed for reasons that engineers who worked on them still refuse to discuss, even today. Today, we're going inside 8 of the most dangerous, most suppressed, and most mysterious prototype vehicles in automotive history. Cars that were built, tested, and eliminated before the public ever had the chance to see what they could do. These are the banned cars that manufacturers were afraid to show. Let's begin. Number 8. The Tucker 48, the car that threatened Detroit. Before we get to the cars that were destroyed in secret, we begin with one that was destroyed in public, because its story is the blueprint for everything that followed. In 1947, an entrepreneur named Preston Tucker announced something that made the entire American automobile industry nervous. He was going to build the safest, fastest, most technologically advanced car ever produced for the American consumer. And he was going to do it outside of Detroit's established order. The Tucker 48 had a padded dashboard, 2 decades before safety padding became standard. It had a windshield designed to pop out on impact, protecting passengers in a crash. It had a center headlight that turned with the steering wheel, illuminating corners before you rounded them. Its rear-mounted engine produced a level of stability that American cars of the era simply didn't offer. It was, by every engineering measure, a generation ahead of anything Ford, GM, or Chrysler was producing. And that was precisely the problem. Within months of the Tucker Corporation announcing its intentions, federal authorities launched a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into the company. Tucker was accused of fraud. His factory, a former wartime bomber plant outside Chicago, was raided. The investigation dragged on for years. Preston Tucker and 7 associates were ultimately acquitted of all charges in 1950, but by then it didn't matter. The Tucker Corporation had been destroyed. The factory was gone. The investors had fled. Only 51 Tucker 48s were ever completed, out of a planned production run of 1,000. Many of the engineers who worked on Tucker's team went on to find their innovations, the padded dash, the pop-out windshield, the rotating headlight, appearing in Detroit vehicles years later, without credit, without compensation. Preston Tucker died of lung cancer in 1956. He maintained until his last breath that the prosecution had been orchestrated by established automakers and their allies in Washington, who saw his car not as a product, but as a threat. Historians still argue about whether he was right. The Tucker 48 was never officially banned. It was simply made impossible. Sometimes that's worse. Number 7. The GM EV1, the electric car they crushed. In 1996, General Motors did something remarkable. They built the future. The EV1 was the first mass-produced electric vehicle offered by a major American automaker. It was modern. It was aerodynamic, with a drag coefficient lower than any production car on Earth at the time. It was genuinely, thrillingly fast. 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds from a standing electric motor that delivered instant torque. And people loved it. GM didn't sell the EV1, they leased it, a decision that, in retrospect, would prove catastrophic for the car's survival. Drivers in California and Arizona who got behind the wheel became devoted advocates. Some formed clubs, some staged vigils outside GM facilities. None of them wanted to give the car back. But in 2003, General Motors announced it was ending the EV1 program. All leases would be terminated, all vehicles would be repossessed. The lessees offered to buy their cars outright. GM refused. They offered to donate the cars to museums and universities. GM refused, with one exception: a single deactivated shell, its drivetrain removed, given to the Smithsonian. Then General Motors did something that shocked even its critics. They crushed them. Every EV1, one by one, was transported to a facility in the Arizona desert and destroyed, compacted into cubes of metal, rendered unrecognizable, unrestorable, and crucially, unstudyable. The official explanation was liability. GM couldn't guarantee the safety of vehicles they no longer manufactured parts for. But the timing was suspicious. The California Air Resources Board, which had mandated that automakers produce zero-emission vehicles, the very regulation that had led to the EV1's creation, had just been pressured into weakening its requirements. The oil industry had lobbied aggressively. GM had sued California to block the mandate. The question that has never been fully answered is this: if the EV1 was a failed technology, too expensive, too limited, too far ahead of its time, why did GM need to destroy every single one? Failed technologies don't get crushed in the desert. Failed technologies just fail. The EV1 was destroyed in 2003. Tesla Motors was founded in 2003. Decide what you make of that. Number 6. The Chrysler turbine car, buried by big oil. In 1963, Chrysler did something no mainstream automaker had done before or has done since. They built a production-ready car powered by a jet turbine engine. Not a concept, not a show car, a functional vehicle lent to ordinary American families for 90-day trial periods, driven on public roads across the country. The Chrysler turbine car could run on almost any combustible liquid: diesel, kerosene, tequila, perfume. The engine didn't care. During a demonstration in Mexico City, it was fueled with tequila and ran perfectly. It had almost no vibration. Turbine engines produce a smooth, unbroken power delivery entirely unlike a piston engine. Drivers described it as driving on air. Cold starts were instant, even in winter. There was no transmission in the conventional sense, no gear changes, no jerking. 503 families drove the Chrysler turbine car between 1963 and 1966. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Chrysler announced they were evaluating mass production. And then something happened. The federal government, under pressure from the petroleum industry, began imposing emissions regulations specifically targeting turbine engines, regulations that required expensive modifications Chrysler had not budgeted for. Simultaneously, import tariffs that had protected the exotic metals needed for turbine components were revised upward. Chrysler suddenly found themselves facing a vehicle that cost far more to produce than anticipated, and a regulatory landscape that seemed almost engineered to make it unviable. Of the 55 Chrysler turbine cars built, 46 were ordered destroyed. The remaining 9 were sent to museums with their turbine engines partially disabled to prevent them from ever being driven again. The engineers who built it knew what had happened. A car that could run on any fuel, that had no dependence on petroleum products, had been driven to its death by the very industry it threatened to undermine. The turbine engine never appeared in another Chrysler product. Number 5. The Ford Nucleon, the atomic car. This one was never built at full scale, but the reason it was abandoned and the speed with which it disappeared from public discourse tells you everything you need to know about what happens when a car concept becomes politically inconvenient. In 1958, Ford Motor Company unveiled the Nucleon, a design concept for a nuclear-powered automobile. The idea was not as absurd as it sounds. The late 1950s were the height of the atomic age. Nuclear power was being proposed for everything from aircraft to cargo ships to household appliances. America's nuclear program had produced miniaturized reactors small enough, engineers believed, to eventually fit inside a large vehicle. The Nucleon's design placed a small fission reactor in a rear pod, shielded, supposedly, to protect the occupants. Ford's engineers proposed that drivers would pull into nuclear service stations rather than petrol stations, where the spent reactor cartridge would be swapped for a fresh one. Range between reactor swaps? 5,000 miles. Fuel cost? Essentially zero. Ford invested significant resources into engineering studies, aerodynamics testing, and materials research for the Nucleon program. And then, almost overnight, it vanished. No official cancellation was announced, no press conference, no statement from Ford's board. The project simply ceased to exist in any public communication from the company. What happened? The most documented explanation involves the United States government's growing unease about civilian nuclear technology following a series of high-profile accidents and near misses in the military nuclear program. The idea of millions of Americans driving around with fission reactors under their rear seats, crashing, being stolen, flooding in storms, catching fire, was politically untenable. Less documented but widely discussed among automotive historians is the role of the oil lobby in signaling to Ford that a zero-fuel vehicle, regardless of its power source, was not something the petroleum industry would passively accept. The full-scale Nucleon was never built. The research documents from the program were classified. Ford never publicly explained why. The 3/8 scale model sits in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. You can visit it, you can photograph it, you can read the placard, but the placard doesn't mention why it never became a real car. Number 4. The Volkswagen 1-liter car, suppressed by the industry. 1 liter. That is how much fuel this car consumed to travel 100 kilometers. Not 10 liters, not 5, 1. In an era when the average European family car was consuming 7 to 9 liters per 100 kilometers, Volkswagen had built a vehicle that was, by any rational measure, the most fuel-efficient automobile in history. Ferdinand Piëch, Volkswagen's chairman, drove the 1-liter car himself in 2002 from Wolfsburg to Hamburg, a round trip of 230 kilometers, using a total of 2.3 liters of diesel. The engineering behind it was extraordinary. The body was made from magnesium and carbon fiber, weighing a total of 290 kilograms, less than a third of a normal car. The engine was a single-cylinder diesel producing just 8.5 horsepower, less than a riding lawnmower. But the aerodynamics were so advanced, so frictionlessly perfect, that 8.5 horsepower was enough to cruise at 120 kilometers per hour. Volkswagen announced the car would enter limited production by 2010. Then 2010 came and went. A heavily modified version, now using a two-cylinder engine, now weighing considerably more, now consuming 0.9 liters per 100 kilometers instead of 1, was eventually released as the XL1 in 2013, in a limited run of 250 units at a price of €111,000. 250 cars, €111,000 each. Not available in the United States, not available in most of the world. The engineers who built the original 1-liter car gave Volkswagen the ability to produce a vehicle that would have rendered conventional fuel consumption obsolete. That vehicle was never made available to ordinary people. The fuel savings it would have generated at scale across millions of drivers, the oil revenue it would have displaced, ran into the hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Make of that what you will. Number 3. The Dodge Tomahawk, deemed too dangerous to exist. Some cars aren't banned because they threaten industry. Some cars are banned because they threaten the people trying to drive them. The Dodge Tomahawk is, by any engineering assessment, the most dangerous vehicle ever presented to the public as a production item. Its specifications read like a dare: 8.3-liter Viper V10, 500 horsepower, 680 pounds, estimated top speed, and Dodge was careful to say estimated because no one was ever allowed to find out, of 420 miles per hour. Dodge sold 9 of them. They sold them, but with a condition so significant it effectively negated the sale entirely. The Tomahawk, Dodge specified, was not street legal. It was not track legal. It was not to be ridden on any surface by any person under any conditions. It was, in the words of one automotive journalist at the time, a motorcycle you cannot ride. The buyers, who paid $555,000 each, received a Tomahawk delivered on a display stand. It came with explicit warnings in the documentation that riding it could result in immediate death. Here is what Dodge's own engineers had calculated, and what was never disclosed publicly during the car's unveiling. The Tomahawk's 4-wheel configuration, 2 wheels at the front, 2 at the rear, each pair mounted on a narrow shared axle, was theoretically capable of generating a wobble oscillation at high speed that no human could correct. The faster the vehicle went, the more the oscillation amplified. The physics were unforgiving. Dodge had built a vehicle that, if ridden at the speeds its engine was capable of producing, would shake itself apart, with the rider on it. The Tomahawk was withdrawn from any consideration of homologation, the legal certification for road or track use, without ever completing a formal speed trial. It was never ridden at speed, on record, by any person, anywhere. The 9 that were sold sit in collectors' garages and on display stands, their engines unstarted, their potential permanently, deliberately unrealized. $500 million of engineering capability, pointed at a wall. Number 2. The General Motors Firebird series, the jets that drove. In the early 1950s, General Motors had a vision. Not of the car you would drive to work, not of the family sedan or the affordable compact. They had a vision of the car as aircraft. Between 1953 and 1959, GM produced 4 concept vehicles under the Firebird designation: Firebird 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each one pushed further than the last. Each one incorporated technology so advanced that in several cases, government agencies intervened to ensure it was never publicly released. Firebird 1 was powered by a gas turbine, the same technology Chrysler would explore a decade later in the turbine car. But GM's version was rawer, faster, and more extreme. Test track speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour were recorded in internal documents. The vehicle was never allowed on public roads. It was tested exclusively by GM employees on private tracks. Firebird 2, unveiled in 1956, went further. It was a full 4-seat family car, turbine-powered, titanium-bodied and equipped with a fully autonomous guidance system. The car could, in a controlled environment, navigate a specially prepared road without driver input. In 1956, General Motors built a self-driving car. Let that sit for a moment. In 1956, General Motors had a working prototype of a self-driving vehicle. It required specially embedded guide wires in the road surface. It was not practical for widespread deployment at the time, but the core technology, the sensor feedback, the automated steering correction, the speed management was functional. It worked. That technology was never developed further, not publicly, not by GM. Firebird 3 in 1958 added fly-by-wire controls, removing the mechanical connection between driver inputs and vehicle response entirely. It had 7 fins. It had a joystick instead of a steering wheel. It was tested at speeds GM has never officially confirmed, in tests that have never been fully declassified. Firebird 4, unveiled in 1959, was a fully automated vehicle designed for the highway of the future, the Autoway in GM's terminology, where cars would travel under central automated guidance without any driver intervention at high speed in close formation. The program ended in 1959. Official explanation: costs, practicality, the technology wasn't ready. But engineers who worked on the Firebird program, several of whom gave interviews in the 1970s and 80s before the full story became more widely known, described a different dynamic. They described visits to GM's test facility from government representatives who were deeply uncomfortable with certain capabilities being demonstrated. They described documents being reviewed and removed. They described a shift in the program's direction that happened not for engineering reasons, but for reasons that were never explained to the technical team. What those capabilities were exactly remains unclear. What is clear is this: in 1959, General Motors buried self-driving car technology, fly-by-wire controls, and turbine propulsion in a heritage center, and the American automobile industry spent the next 60 years producing piston-engine cars with steering wheels. Whether that was inevitable, or whether it was a choice made by people whose interests were served by keeping the car exactly as it was, is a question that automotive historians are still asking. Number 1. The Rover P6BS, killed by a rival's ego. We end with a car that was killed not by governments, not by oil companies, not by physics. It was killed by one man's ego. And that, in many ways, is the most British story on this entire list. In the mid-1960s, Rover's legendary chief engineer Spen King received a challenge from the company's chairman, A.B. Smith. Rover had just acquired a remarkable aluminum V8 from Buick, compact, powerful, light as a feather. Smith's instruction to King was simple and bold: build us a sports car. King's response, recalled in a 1993 interview with Classic and Sports Car magazine, was characteristically direct. "Right," he said, "you want a sports car, we'll jolly well give you a sports car." What King and his team produced, mostly in secret, mostly at nights and weekends, using a modified P6 chassis, a Vauxhall Viva steering rack, and that glorious all-aluminum V8, was the P6BS. The name stood for P6-based, Buick engine, sports car. It had 3 seats. The engine sat behind the driver, offset slightly to the right to allow the gearbox to run alongside it, a packaging solution of pure engineering elegance. The body, designed by King himself because the styling department was too busy, was rough and purposeful and faster looking than anything Rover had ever made. It weighed 1,270 kilograms. It did 0 to 60 in 7 seconds. Its top speed was 140 miles per hour, on the par with the Ferrari Dino of the same era. Testing was conducted under strict secrecy. Runs at the Motor Industry Research Association Proving Ground happened at night and at weekends when fewer eyes were watching. And when the car was finally shown to journalists, when Motor Magazine was given an exclusive road test, the response was unambiguous. They wrote that they could not recall driving any other road car with more sheer glued-on adhesion than that one. Autocar was equally direct. They wrote that it would be difficult for Leyland to ward off demand which was bound to follow its showing. In 1968, Rover was absorbed into British Leyland Motor Corporation, a conglomerate so large and so badly managed that it would eventually require a government bailout to survive. And within that conglomerate was Jaguar. And Jaguar had a founder. Sir William Lyons had spent his entire career building Jaguar into the definitive British sports car brand. He was, by every account, brilliant, imperious, and utterly intolerant of competition from within the same corporate family. When Lyons saw the P6BS now being developed into a refined production-ready version called the P9 with a dramatic new body from Rover's design chief David Back, he did not see a colleague's achievement. He saw a threat to the E-Type's successor. He lobbied hard for the program to be killed. Triumph joined the opposition, worried that the P9 would undermine their own Stag, a car that, as history would record, had rather more serious problems to worry about than competition from Rover. The P9 program was cancelled around 1970. No announcement, no press conference, no acknowledgement that one of the most exciting cars Britain had ever engineered had just been strangled in its development bay by internal politics. Only one P6BS prototype was ever built. It survives today at the British Motor Museum in Gaydon, still drivable, still the car that Motor Magazine said had adhesion unlike anything they had ever experienced. It sits 40 meters from the spot where it was tested in secret 60 years ago. The engineer who designed its body went on to use the same instincts he had applied to the P6BS on another project, a project that did make it to production, a project that became one of the most successful and beloved vehicles in automotive history. That project was the Range Rover. Spen King gave the world the Range Rover, and somewhere in the process, we lost the car that might have been even better. Sometimes, the most devastating thing a story can tell you is not what was destroyed, it's what was replaced by something lesser, and how easily that replacement was accepted. 8 cars, 8 stories. Some ended in a crusher, some in a classified storage unit, some in a glass case with a placard that tells you nothing. And one, the last one, was killed not by governments or oil companies, but by one man who couldn't stand the idea of competition. Here is what connects them. Every car on this list represented a direction that the automobile could have taken, a different future, a road not driven. Some were stopped because they were genuinely dangerous, some because they were genuinely threatening, some because the people who controlled the industry had more to gain from the car staying exactly as it was than from the car becoming what it could be. The history of the automobile is not just the history of the cars that were built. It is the history of the cars that were almost built, the ones that were tested and feared and taken apart in the night, the ones that changed everything for the people who saw what they could do, and changed nothing because those people made sure of it. If this video made you think about what else might have been buried, subscribe and we'll keep digging, because the things they didn't want you to know are always the most important things to know.